Stories told of a young man who had just finished preacher training school and went to his first preaching job up in Kentucky. And he had polished him off a wonderful lesson on the evils of tobacco. He went in the pulpit that Sunday morning, fire breathing, and extolling the virtues of every tobacco stalk that had ever been grown to be thrown in the ocean and poison the fish or something. Went on and on and on for about 30 minutes and was quite pleased with himself and made his way to the back of the building. And one of the first men that came out of the back of the building pulled him aside and said, "Did you not see all around us a burley tobacco crop that pays your salary, boy? Don't you know you can't preach on that subject around here?" They said, "Oh, I was not aware of that." And so he went home that week and worked on him another wonderful sermon, put it all together, approached the subject from just about every way that he possibly could, and went to the pulpit and preached one of the best sermons you ever heard on the evils of alcohol. Sure enough, as he went to the back of the building, quite proud of the sermon that he had presented, this same guy came up to him and said, "Buddy, don't you know what the name of this county is? Bourbon County, Kentucky. And we've got a couple of distilleries right here in town, and probably at least a third of your salary is coming from the sale of either Evans Williams or some other Kentucky Sour Mash whiskey." They said, "Oh, wasn't aware of that." So he went home and was searching for something else to preach on. He said, "I know what it is." So he went and worked on a sermon, went to the pulpit the next Sunday and jumped all over gambling. Sure enough, he went to the back of the building. Another fellow came out and pulled him aside and said, "This is a bluegrass state. That means that everybody has at least a partial ownership in a thoroughbred racing horse, and they don't race just to be on television. They race to gamble on the horses. And there's a very good likelihood that at certain times of the year you're being paid almost exclusively by money that has been won in gambling on the horses." He said, "Oh," he said, "here I am, 3 weeks in my first preaching job. I find out I can't preach on tobacco. I can't preach on alcohol. I can't preach on gambling. What can I preach on?" The fellow said, "I tell you what, preach on African witch doctors. We don't have any of those around here." And sometimes that is exactly the way things seem to be. I have been told that the best time to preach a sermon on modest apparel is during the winter, so that it will not have such a great effect, because when there is snow on the ground, it seems that nobody has trouble putting on enough clothes. I've also been told that the best time to preach on forsaking the assembly is probably on Sunday morning, because on Sunday evening, those that need to hear the sermon on forsaking the assembly have forsaken the assembly and don't hear the sermon. And it just might be the case that the things that we're going to be talking about tonight, ain't no just abouts to it, absolutely, that what we're going to be talking about tonight needs to be heard by everybody that's not here, whether they're not here by choice or not here because they can't be here. The only difference is with those individuals, those who are not here by choosing not to be here stand twice as condemned because of their refusal to simply show up so that they might learn better what our obligation is relative to this significant subject. Now, could you imagine? Could you even imagine in your wildest dreams, if you were here this morning, accepting what was said in this pulpit from the Scriptures as true, and then not even attempting to come back tonight? Folks, there's no doubt about it. Individuals like that have a significant problem. A problem that will cost them their souls. That's why I say it. If there's something that comes out of this pulpit, it better be important or it ain't got no business being said to begin with. Therefore, when we talk about the future of this country, when we talk about the future of this congregation, the future of the Lord's church, the future of your family, the future of my family, where are my grandchildren going to be in 50 years? Where are my great-grandchildren and your great-grandchildren going to be in 100 years? Those are as important a matters as there could possibly be. But if we're not going to think about them, then that says a whole lot about us, for sure. And it just might be that such individuals that have no greater appreciation for the truth than that are pulling the preacher aside and said, don't you know you can't preach about that? Don't you know you can't preach about that? Don't you know? Well, maybe you can find you a good congregation that only preaches on African witch doctors and the sinfulness of being associated with that, and you can pacify your little mind while you head to eternal torment. Because that's exactly what's going to happen. It's always been the responsibility of gospel preachers and gospel preaching to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. Now, that's by design. It's not because God gives us a description of His faithful proclaimers in the Word of God and says, all right, when you find somebody that feels satisfied and secure, stomp on their toe and make them feel bad. That's not it. But it just so happens that in the faithful presentation of the truth, that's what's going to happen. Does that mean that we have to, at all points and at all times, be scowling and not ever be happy? Well, anybody knows me knows better than that. But the thing is, we have to be happy and excited and feel good about the things that God is happy and excited and feels good about. And we don't have any right to feel happy, excited, and good about things that are contrary to His will, right? Because after all, if we follow in the footsteps of Jesus, that does mean, thinking like Jesus thinks, talking like Jesus would talk, in our dealings with our fellow man, dealing with people the way that Jesus would deal with people. Somebody says, well, how can we do something like that? It's called the Bible that reveals to us how Jesus did it. And we follow His example, then that is the perfect example. Freedom. Or is it? Notice that little subtle question mark there. Along with freedom, there will always come the dreaded consequences. Can you believe? Here's a fellow who was blessed to the extent that he was not killed. His mom and daddy set him to floating in the Nile River. He was snatched up, ends up in the king's palace, goes to the best school, has the best food, graduates from the University of Egypt with no doubt an equivalent of a doctorate degree as the grandson of the Pharaoh, and yet he chose to suffer affliction with the people of God rather than enjoying the pleasures of sin. Ah, see, there they are. That's what the devil's always said, isn't it? The pleasures of sin. That warrants anything and everything, doesn't it? No, that's not where the passage stops. The pleasures of sin for a season. Now, there's all different types of seasons. You got spring, fall, you got football season, baseball. The idea here is a brief period of time, a season. It doesn't even qualify as a year here. Because in the expanse of eternity, a season is not even hardly a big drop in the bucket. So when you've got somebody like Moses, pretty famous character, pretty astute thinker, courageous man, without a doubt. He simply demonstrated that he was thinking correctly when he turned his back on Egypt and said, how much dust is between here and Canaan? He's thinking right. He had drawn the proper conclusion. He knew he was a Hebrew. He knew that this nation of people was going to the promised land. And he knew that in God's scheme of things, he could figure prominently into that scheme. And who better to be a leader than one who had been groomed in the ways of leading like Moses. Now, isn't it amazing how that out of all the people, here you've got one man who is given the tremendous task of leading the children of Israel out of Egyptian bondage. But it wasn't just any old man. It was a person who had been trained and groomed and prepared for this tremendous job. And while Moses may not have understood all the wherefores and the therefores leading up to the point, I guarantee he had to draw on all the resources that he had been exposed to, and then some, in dealing with these murmuring, complaining, griping brethren of his. And he did it. But he chose, and he made the right choice. That's what freedom makes possible. Choices. But the bad thing is that while freedom makes possible choices, we can make the wrong one too. I mean, can you imagine? Would this even be in the Scripture? If it said, well, without faith, Moses did not choose to suffer affliction with the people of God. He'd rather stay in Egypt, marry a good little old Egyptian girl, and have a family, and be satisfied, and end up over there in one of those sarcophagus or something. I know they having a big exhibit at Memphis. Here's Moses. Here's the coffin or whatever it is of Moses. That's the way he chose. But he could have chose that. Right choices will result in right consequences. Difficult choices oftentimes result in right consequences. Bad choices, which we have the freedom to make, may in effect harm a whole lot more people than just us. As a matter of fact, it may harm those that are the nearest and the dearest to us. That's why it's so important. Guaranteed. You know, we oftentimes make jokes about brothers and sisters and our love-hate relationship and how they fight constantly with each other. But if a grizzly bear was to appear on the scene, then they'd fight a grizzly bear for the other. Well, that's the way we do in families. Knock down, drag out. And yet, if somebody comes on the scene that wants to do something, harm physically, then we're ready to fight. But yet, what if we invite the culprit into our house? What if we're the one that basically loads the gun and hands it to them? Says, here's my kids. Have at it. Surely we wouldn't do anything like that. Surely decisions like that, even though the consequences are so obvious, wouldn't be done. Well, they are. And connect this, please connect this to the reality that only a short 56 years ago, it was against the law in all of the red states for white children and black children to go to school together. That's 56 years ago. Somebody said, I ain't but 20. That don't make any sense. I don't have any concept of 56 years ago. I'm not but 20 right now. You turn around about twice and you'll be 50 and you'll say, boy, I understand what he's talking about now. But don't wait till you get then to understand it. Understand it right now. Did things that happened prior to 1954 result in the things that were going on in 1954? Do the things that are happening in the year 2010, are they the result of decisions that were made 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago? Well, obviously so. So, the decisions that we make have an effect on what happens from here on. Not only for me, but for you. Maybe not only for me and you, but maybe for the whole community. Maybe for the whole state. You know, I put in the article, I don't know if it's been in the Tribune yet or not, but it will be soon, Lord willing. We couldn't find 300 people in the city limits that would vote against the admission of the sale of liquor in the city limits. Couldn't find 300 people in Dunlap, Tennessee. Now, before that time, you would have thought, man, there wouldn't be no problem at all finding 300 people that would stand opposed to that going on, sell liquor here in Dunlap. You got to be kidding. But there wasn't 300. Well, I meant to tell me that. If it meant as much to you as it should have, you wouldn't have meant to. You'd have took care of it. No doubt about that, folks. Now that's how long ago was that? 2 years? And did we know then that when you let that come into town and the state regulates where a liquor store can be, then the distance between a beer establishment and a church building, or a beer establishment and a school, that's out the window now, folks. Because the state government decides. And you can't have footage for beer that's different than footage for liquor. So you let the state decide where beer and where liquor is sold. No longer do we have a say-so. Thank you, absent of 300 people. Well, it don't really matter that much. Oh, really? I remember times you bought whiskey in Dunlap, you had to buy it from a bootlegger. Don't have to do that no more, do you? Progress. Choices. Does this have anything to do at all with our children? It seems like to me that one of the things that we stressed, or that was stressed to us when we were kids, when we were going to school, was the evils of alcohol. And while there was a whole lot of hypocrisy involved in it, because some of those that were stressing that so loudly and so strongly were themselves drinkers, it was still stress. And there were some who were honest in their opposition thereto. When we all boil it down and we focus it in on who more directly is affected by our choices, who would that be, reckon? Since life is such a short thing, and it seems as though we go to at least 2 or 3 funerals a week, that still does not remove from fact that we're still affecting a whole lot of people as time goes on. Who are we affecting, and how are we affecting? And there's nothing more important than this. It's not uncommon for young people to lose interest in spiritual matters, to pull away, become distant, to start missing some, then quit attending, to become involved in alcohol and drugs, to date, engage in marrying non-Christians. Point right here. Request a copy of this lesson right here and personally provide it for those who are not able to be here tonight, and demonstrate a concern for them and their families because they're missing this lesson, please. Ultimately, they're lost to the world. Why? If we can figure out why and take away some of the contributing factors that leads to so many kids leaving, then we will hopefully keep more from leaving. Why? Peer pressure, bad influence, first and foremost, of their friends. It would be wonderful if everybody that we came in contact with every day was really desirous of doing the right thing about everything. But that is obviously not going to happen. That's not the real world. It's not that that's impossible to happen. It's that the power of Satan and the power of individual people's lust is of such a nature that people choose to not be influenced for what's right and for what's good, more so than they should. Bad influences. Can you believe it that we've made it to a point in time in which you actually have to start getting real detailed in explaining what you mean by bad? Because at one time, while there was such a thing as bad and good, and they were pretty well black and white, well, now there's some of those neutral things that are neither black nor white. And then there's all different types of shades of black and all different types of shades of white. And sometimes it's almost impossible. And sometimes you have to figure out, well, okay, can I say this? Am I on the north side of the Mason-Dixon line, or am I on the south side? Because it really doesn't matter as to where you live, as to whether... It's sort of like a little joke that me and Tammy have, we pull up to a red light. All right? Right on red after stop in months that end in Y. Well, that's not right, of course. But some things are like that, they think. You get all these exceptions to the rule. I before E except after C, or it sounds like A as in neighbor and way. Well, wonderful. Bad influence of friends. Is it bad influence or is it good influence? Is it what ought to be influencing, or is it something that ought to be as far away from being influenced as ever could be? 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 33. Anytime you find a scripture that says, be not deceived, rest assured, people are. Be not deceived. You mean there are some people that don't really believe that evil communications corrupt good manners? They don't. They think that it don't have any bearing whatsoever on an individual. You can absolutely run with the worst heathens there are, and it won't have any bad effects on you at all. Paul didn't know it. He said when we run with people like that, and you end up acting like them, you end up smelling like them, you end up doing like them. Bad influences of friends. That's why we're losing young people. Do you think that when it comes to this matter of bad influence, that is something that goes away once a child hits maybe 18, 20? I guarantee you, if you enroll at the local senior citizens, there'll be people there, senior citizens, who'll influence you away from what you ought to do. Maybe fewer in number, I hope, than an 18-year crowd. But there'll be people that'll influence you away. It's called peer pressure. The wise man Solomon put it this way in Proverbs chapter 1, verses 8 through 15. And just parts of those verses. My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. Now here's the enticing. What do they say? Come with us, let us lay wait for blood. Let us lurk privily for the innocent without cause. And he says, cast in thou lot among us. We'll all have the same purse. What is he talking about here? He says, go in with us. We'll be one big gang. We'll have one big pile of money, and we'll split it all even Steven. Everybody needs money, right? And especially now, as destitute as things are across this country. And you know good and well that some of these rich people that we're knocking off, they've made their money a dishonest way. And you end up justifying robbing somebody before all said and done. How could you get in a position like that? How could somebody that's got good sense and was able to actually answer the questions right and get their driver's license, how could they be hoodwinked into going with some crowd like this and do what they do and end up in prison? They do it all the time. Why do they do that? Because they can. Why can they? Because they have the power of choice. And they choose to do that which is wrong. Somebody says, well, maybe somebody else, but not anybody that I know. Especially not anybody I know closely. Oh, really? Think seriously about the information that we do get from public service announcements on television. Because most of the time, they are as accurate as can be demonstrated on television. You know that little, are those little, thought-provoking, don't do meth advertisements, public service announcements? Here's a good-looking teenage girl, and she's talking on the phone to her girlfriend, says, yeah, I've told them I was coming to your house, and you've told your folks you're coming to my house, and we're going to go, and we're just going to do it one time. They're making this big plan. And the thrill of telling the story to your parents, the thrill of breaking the law, the thrill of not getting caught. Oh, man, it's enticing. But the only problem is that one time turns into years and maybe turns into the cemetery. And that pretty little girl or that nice-looking young man turns into a skeleton that is barely alive and will be affected the rest of their life. Right, Harley? Choices. Wrong choices. Somebody will walk off the street and say, hey, I ain't never seen you before in all my life. Would you like to do... Usually it's not like that. It's usually someone that wants to be classified as a friend. A friend entices you. Well, if you got any sense, you will not go with this so-called friend. Why are we losing our young people? There is absolutely no doubt whatsoever but that this one could be number one. But we put it number two. Maybe that's because I is a parent. Why are we losing our young people? Because of another poor example. And that is the poor example of parents. Now, here's something that you know as well as I do. I don't have to tell you. But let's be reminded of it together. People learn, not just by sitting down and reading a book, because sometimes they won't do that. They'll sometimes sit down and look at pictures, or they'll sit down and play a video game, but they do take in information from what they see too. And what do young people see? Think about it here in Dunlap, Tennessee. Think about it here at Dunlap, Tennessee tonight. What do they see? Well, today, I guarantee you, there are young people, either in the assembly right now or that were in the assembly this morning, that saw parents that did not go to Bible class. Now, before someone jumps up and makes a false accusation, I have never, and no faithful child of God has ever, called into question a person's faithfulness who could not do something due to difficulties beyond their control. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who could but simply refuse to come to Bible class. They see parents that don't go on Sunday night. And I'm not talking about people who can't get out after dark. I'm not talking about people that are so old and lame that they can't walk except during the daytime for a few steps. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about people who choose to do something else, such as some are doing tonight, and not come to Sunday evening services. That's what I'm talking about. They see parents who don't go to services on Wednesday night. Did you know that this congregation is held up before other congregations in the valley for the percentage of come back on Sunday night and come back on Wednesday night members or attendance. Because our numbers are better than anybody up and down the valley, percentage-wise. But here's the thing. I am not concerned, and the Lord is not concerned with percentages. If one wants to be considered faithful, they will be at the service of the church, period. Ain't no percentages in that. And I will never be satisfied until everybody that really does want to go to heaven will be at the services. And guess what? They are already. Do young people see that? Let me ask you this real quick before we can go any further. Do you think that young people being influenced by other young people has a greater influence for bad on a young person, more so than the parents who don't do these three things here? I think it's a tie. They see parents that don't support gospel meetings, won't show up for a vacation Bible school, even though you'll call it a family vacation Bible school. Miss a lot unnecessarily. Emphasis is on material things, not spiritual things. Emphasize schoolwork, but not Bible work. Point right here. Every teacher in every class has the same page of material with the same memory verse and the same passages of Scripture that will be used and can be used for daily Bible reading in the home. Everybody in this whole congregation that's involved in our teaching program. Everybody does. And if you put all of that humongous amount of outside reading material together, it will take you, in the course of 3 months, about an hour to read it out. But yet, if we come in here on Sunday morning, and I made this point in Bible class this morning, when at least the older classes know what's going to be read, what's going to be studied next week, and we come in and we open up our Bibles to, say, Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, like we did this morning, and everybody hears that read, but they've never heard that read before, at least in the last year. Do you know if your kids passed from the 3rd grade to the 4th grade? Do you know what they made on a spelling test? Do you know if they can write their name in cursive or not? Do you know if they make their B's and D's and D's into B's and P's and upside down? You know all that stuff? Do they know who the 12 sons of Jacob were? Who Joshua is? Can we emphasize one to the exclusion of the other? Be faithful. Now, I don't mean not emphasize. Secular. This just comes down to which one is really the most important. I mean, that's not really a question that needs to be asked, is it? And when I say flirting with the world in all of its forms, I mean that aptly describes what's going on. So here you got the influence of other teenagers. Then you got young people who will see their parents, don't go to class, don't go Sunday night, Wednesday night, gospel meetings, miss a lot unnecessarily, emphasize material over spiritual, schoolwork over Bible work, flirt with worldliness in all its forms. Should it really surprise us when they end up becoming just exactly what they were trained to be? If they follow the example of mom and dad. You know how it goes. And there's no reason whatsoever why it should. But it becomes a family model. Buck the system. Say, this generation ain't going to do it. And this might happen, as you might influence the older generation to do what they should have been doing all along anyhow, as far as the example. Now, folks, that right there is not rocket science. But it is accurate. No way for us to conclude this lesson tonight without making a mess of the rest of it. Is there anything more dear and near to our heart than our offspring? No. And that's a reason for that. There is a sin called without natural affection. That means you naturally. It's built into the system. Even wild animals will protect their children. But folks, sadly, in this land of the free, in which people are free to make choices, sometimes animals do a whole lot better job taking care of their kids than do humans. Because many a human, mom and dad, has actually sold their children to the devil. And some of them on purpose. Don't have to be that way. And the sooner we recognize that this is not a game, that this is for keeps, that we got one chance, and time keeps moving on as we are on the highway to somewhere. Where is it? We're on the highway to. It may be that in our audience tonight, there's one or more that is not a Christian, is not a child of God, has never obeyed the gospel, doesn't have the privilege of saying, "My Father, which art in heaven." There's a lady up in Smith County, good a girl as you'd ever want to find, and her husband was just as good. Let me tell you a little bit about them real quick. When we moved to Smith County, Glenn got coached to riding up there with us. It was about 350 degrees in the shade, moving in a, obviously, not an air-conditioned U-Haul for sure. And here was a fella that met us there at the house that we bought and helped us move in. Moved all our furniture in, stayed there from beginning to end. Offered his services to us, anything that we needed. About 2 months later, found out he wasn't even a member of church. And then strange things would happen. Things that he would do. Like when he'd get a raise at work, he'd say, I want to buy some new film strips. Maybe some new film strips. Don't we need some new film strip projectors? Well, he knew because he had seen the ones that we used on him. He said, let me, Carolyn, buy some song books. We need some new song books. When we go in this new church building, let us buy the new song books. And all this, he wanted done with nobody else knowing it was going on. And so y'all don't tell. And then his first grandchild was on the way to being born. And hers, of course, too, was on the way to being born. And they were told by the doctors that there was a good chance that the child was not going to even be born alive. And if it was born alive, it would be all types of complications and all that goes along with having sometimes those tests that you have. And so it scared them plumb silly that something terrible was going to happen, you know. And Carolyn said, I began to think how that here I had my first grandchild fixing to be born, terrible sickness possible. No telling what is going to be wrong with me. And I could not even pray to God with any hopes of being heard. She was thankful. Her and Gerald ended up obeying the gospel. Of course, the child was born. There wasn't a thing wrong with it. But the realization that here she was as helpless could be, and nowhere to turn, helped her to realize, more than she had ever realized before, there was available access to the throne of God. But she hadn't taken advantage of it. She could not make known her desires, her hopes, her thank yous, nothing. Because she had not exercised her freedom of choice and become a Christian. We're thankful, as Paul was, concerning the church at Rome, that they had obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine that was delivered them, then being made free from sin, but that they became the servants of righteousness. That's exactly what will happen if you too will obey that same form of doctrine. If you believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God, if you're willing to repent of your sins, confess the name of Christ tonight, then you can be baptized into Christ, where all spiritual blessings are found. Maybe in times past that's what you did, but you've wandered away and you need to be restored to a right relationship with God. For that purpose as well, we'll be singing this invitation song to encourage you to come while we stand and while we sing.